My name's Alyssa, and we are the junior and senior class of Mount Madonna School. Thank you so much for meeting with us today. We have some questions prepared, but if you have any opening statements, we'd love to hear them.
Excellent. Well, now I think that takes me as, that's an invitation. If I don't give an opening statement, that would be inappropriate. So I'd just like to say welcome and thank you very much for coming. And thank you for your interest in the General Services Administration in particular and government in general. And what I'd like to talk to you about is how interesting and exciting a career in public service can be. And while you don't have to devote your entire career path to it, I'd ask that all of you as committed, dedicated, people of this country to think about all the gifts that we've been given and think about ways that you can give back along the way too, either through working for the government, supporting the political process, running for office yourself. And looking around the room, I see some great potential congressmen and senators and maybe a president or two. And think about ways that you can stay involved and engage. It's disengagement in our government and in our country that actually leads to the most profound problems. The solutions are generated by people, smart, committed people like you, and we need you in the field. We need you in the battle. We need you thinking about ways you can make your country stronger and your government better. And that's what we do, or try to do here every day at the General Services Administration. We're in the background doing the infrastructure work of providing government services. We do three primary things. We provide real estate management services for the federal government. We oversee about 370 million square feet of office space, which, if it sounds big, it's because it is. That is the largest commercial real estate entity in the country and maybe the world. We have over 10,000 buildings. 450 of them are historically registered buildings of historic significance. They're part of our national patrimony and history. They're buildings like this one and this amazing room, which technically is my office. I would be scared to sit in it, so I like to only do it when there are a lot of people here with me. But then we also do about $65 billion of procurement activity. About 15% of everything the government buys, we help them buy. And more we're focusing on technology and technology services, really connecting people in the way they expect to be connected to their government in the 21st century. If you think about the evolution from video stores to Netflix, do you have any vague memory of video stores? Yeah, okay. Vague, right, yeah. I think there's still one left. It's a part of the Smithsonian Museum. But we have to recognize that kind of massive transition that's happened in our private lives has to happen in our public lives as well. And we have to think smart and fast and with innovation about how we deliver services better to the American people. So that's it. That's what we spend our day doing here. And I'd love to hear your questions and comments and even suggestions if you have an idea of how we can be a better agency or a better government.
I will start. My name is Roger.
Hi, Roger.
So in the FCW magazine it said, for a smart guy, Dan Tangherlini has made some questionable career moves. The article went on to enumerate the many interesting steps of your career to date, and we're curious to know if there's a particular basis or a set of guiding principles that you base your career choices on.
So I think in a less charitable moment, my family would challenge the first part of the statement, but absolutely agree with the second one. But to be honest, I think it really comes down to this idea of going where people want you or need you, or going where the situation is difficult, going where maybe the challenges are a bit harder, going where you can have the most impact. And so frequently I've done the job that no one else wanted to do, that people maybe with longer tenure or more experience thought would be threatening to their long-term career. But I always thought that that would be the best place to give back and the place you can make the most difference. My younger brother is a firefighter in San Francisco. And what I admire about him and his colleagues is their willingness to actually run into burning buildings. Right? That goes against everything like we've ever been taught. You stay away from hot. They go to hot. And I just admire the heroism of people who are willing to make potential sacrifice. And so in that sense, when I look at what he does and the challenge is that he and his colleagues face every day in their work, my stuff seems easy, and it seems like a basic responsibility to try to do. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Martin. We read that you came into the GSA at a critical point in the agency's history. I would like to think that you had an initial strategy and then also the need to respond to conditions as you found them. What are some of the initial challenges you faced regarding the rallying and restructuring of the GSA?
That's a really great question, Martin. Thank you. And I'm not sure if I'll have as good an answer as maybe you anticipate, because I didn't know I was coming to the GSA. I got a call on a Friday when I was with my family on vacation, and I was asked if I would take on this assignment starting Monday. So my initial strategy was really how to overcome shock and how to convince my family that this would be an okay thing to do. So when I came here, really, my fundamental strategy as a manager was to create a process by which we could listen to every one of our employees and really understand what they thought the challenge and the threat and the opportunity was in rethinking a GSA. We also needed, and I knew this coming right in, we needed to reestablish trust in our ability to manage these resources that are entrusted in us. Our job is to work with money that comes from the American taxpayer who voluntarily pay to run their government. And what we had done in that situation that led to my coming here was really violate that trust. We needed to be clear about the fact that that was unacceptable. We needed to demonstrate that there would be consequences. We needed to show a pattern of reform. And then, more importantly, we needed to recommit to the 12,000 employees, the vast majority of whom had nothing to do with anything that happened in those events, that we really did believe that they were committed, dedicated, honest, hardworking public servants who had an important mission, and that we were going to get back to it, and not just get back to it, but even get better at it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi,
Hi.
my name's Lexi.
Hi,
and
Lexi.
Following up on what you were just talking about, we were curious to know how you managed to connect with employees and help to create a more unified vision of what you wanted to see the GSA become once you established your leadership.
I think that's the biggest challenge of any manager and leader, is figuring out a way to connect and build support from the people you manage and lead. No single person gets anything done in an organization this big. We need every one of the people in this organization to do their job, to find ways to do it better, to commit to the outcomes and help us set the goals. So we started a process called the top to bottom review, in which we sat and we asked every part of the agency, every component of the agency, to describe who they were, what they did, what resources they had at their disposal, and asked them if they could do things differently. What would they do? What were their biggest challenges? What did they see the biggest opportunities were? And that was really to start an organization-wide dialogue around how we could be stronger and better and smarter. I also spent a lot of time going, not physically at first, but virtually, to each one of the regions and holding regional town halls, demonstrating that we were going to be very conservative and smart about use of travel funds. That was part of what got us in trouble. But also that we could leverage technology to stay connected. That last part, leveraging technology, we extended further by doing something called the Great Ideas Hunt, in which we invited all 12,000 employees to look across the entire organization and say, what could we do better? How could we be smarter? And the great thing was we had people in the public building service at any level who could comment about any part of the organization. If they wanted to say that the Federal Acquisition Service could be better, we let them do that. The one thing we required people to do, and if you use social media, have you heard of social media? No, just, if you use social media, you know that if you're anonymous, there's a tendency to be less, say, rigorous in the way you frame your ideas or frankly respond to other people. So the one requirement we had is that you had to say who you were. You couldn't anonymize your suggestion and you couldn't anonymize your response. We got something close to 1,000 suggestions, but we got thousands and thousands of responses. And that was the best part. We had sparked a dialogue across our organization using a social media-like tool that we have here for sharing ideas. And what happened was the good ideas that we got initially really became great ideas through the dialogue that we had sparked by breaking down boundaries and by eliminating hierarchy and saying that this wasn't about where you were on the org chart, but it was really about what you wanted and the way the organization could be better. And we've tried to keep finding ways to activate the interests of our folks, continue to spark a conversation and dialogue, go out, and I've visited all 11 regions now at least once. I think that's the biggest challenge, though. How do you keep it going? How do you not let yourself become remote and removed and think that work is done? It's never done. And I think, actually, I think you guys at some level have it easier because of social media. Your kind of continuous connection and your continuous conversation that happens through the various platforms is really a fascinating opportunity for those of us in leadership positions to try to spark the same kind of relationship with the people we work with. Thanks. Great question.
Hi, my name's Rami.
Hi.
Elise Nelson, the president of Vital Voices, said in her interview with us that power expands the moment it's shared. Has this been your experience? And if so, can you give us an example?
I think you're sitting in an example, right? This is a 1,600 square foot mahogany paneled coffered ceiling replica of a 16th century British manor house, right? This was the sole provenance of the administrator of the General Services Administration. This is the third largest office in Washington, D.C. You'll notice that there's something distinctly missing from this office, and that's a single desk. This is no longer where I sit. It's no longer the office of the administrator for day-to-day purposes. We actually share it with the entire building and with other agencies so that they can come here and sit under silver-plated chandeliers and do the work of the people. I now sit with, I joke, 50 of my closest friends and colleagues in an open area, an open space that's kind of collaborative and continually engaging, with the idea being that I'm just part of a team, I'm not separate from the team, and that the power of the organization is something that we collectively put towards the problems that we face. Now, my job at the end of the day, like a coach on the sideline, is to make the choices, to make the calls, put people in, put people out, try to work with the various captains, say, or members of the team to design the play. But I think if you allowed yourself to think that because you have the position, you alone have the power, you would find it very hard to actually get anything done.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Just as you were talking about that when you came to the GSA, you moved out of this large office space to create a more collaborative atmosphere. And I'm curious to know how this has been working for you.
Well, the nice thing about it for me was this is something I'd already done in several of my other jobs. And in fact, when I'd been given the first operation I had a chance to run when I was the chief financial officer of the Metropolitan Police Department here in DC, I was actually at business school at the same time. And we had a little baby at home. That was an exciting time. But I studied a class called Operations Improvement, which really looks at the way manufacturing gains efficiencies and improves quality. And what I realized was that my chief financial officer office was like a factory floor. We had processes, we had systems, we had things that we passed from office to office, but we literally were carved up into individual offices. So getting things from one end to the process to the other involved going out into the hallway and then back into another office. And it's normal etiquette that when you're visiting someone's house, you go and introduce yourself to the person who owns the house, right? You visit your friend's house. If the parent's in the house, I'd advise you to say, "Hi, I'm here." And so that would happen with things that were going from office to office. It would have to leave the office generally by the person who ran the office and go to the next office and be handed to the person who ran that office. That added time, it added inefficiency, and it kept the people who were working on the issues from ever getting to know each other. So one of the things we did was we just knocked all the walls down. What I found, and I've found it every time since, is the people who were in charge of that office, they had the hardest time with that. Right? Because suddenly now people could go from unit to unit, they could have conversations, and they were no longer in charge, and they felt that they had lost some control. I think, though, that is a legitimate concern, and the way you deal with that is by being smart about process and have continuous reporting. And I think that the other way is to actually take the person out of their own little private sub-office and put them in the hubbub of all that process so they can see what's going on. So when I moved over later on to be the city administrator, Mayor Fenty, who I was his deputy mayor and city administrator, we had talked to Michael Bloomberg, who had adopted this same principle for the mayor's office. And he had moved out of an office that looked kind of like this, a little smaller. That's a joke. Moved out of an office like this into a big space where he brought all the smartest and most connected people in his administration into one space. And what he told Mayor Fenty at the time was, a lot of people who run for office make a mistake thinking that they're actually running to inhabit a physical office, 4 walls, a ceiling, and a floor. That's not what you're running for. You're running for a position in which you are responsible for making decisions. And the best decisions are made with the best information. And the best way to get the best information is to talk to people who actually have it. And in a place as complicated as New York, there is no one person who's going to have the full understanding of the sweep of a big situation. Your communications person is critical to have in that space with you. If you come up with a problem, you can have the right people who know what resources they have at their disposal. They might have their different perspectives, and then you can actually really think through a solution rather than just taking whatever information the one assigned person who's sent into a room like this would bring you. And that's, I think that was a really brilliant observation of Mr. Bloomberg. Now, he has some stake in that. His whole business, the thing that made him a few dollars, was actually the information, sharing information business. But I think he proved himself to be a pretty effective mayor too. So I went over to Treasury. I did the same thing there, built a little bullpen. So when I came here, there are a lot of people who said, look, we're going in this direction with no offices. Are you going to be okay without having an office? And I said, I don't have one now. And I think they thought, where did they find the only other person in Washington who is willing to do this job? So, no, it's been an interesting challenge, but I really think it's been very effective, at least for me and for this organization. Thanks.
Hi, you've already touched on this a little bit, but in an interview with the Washington Post, you said, the question is, do people feel like they have permission to make suggestions to change the game? Do people have the confidence to take the risk to change the game? Do people feel like they have the support and the network from within their work to explore and pursue the ideas? I think that's a fundamental challenge not only for an organization, but for everyone in that organization. How do you, as the administrator of the GSA, ensure that your staff has the confidence to share their voices?
It's a really great question. I think one of the ways you do it is by making sure that when you're interviewed in the Washington Post, you say things like that so people can see that their boss really believes that. The other thing is you don't sit in a space like this and make people come in here. Can you imagine, like, if you had a crazy idea and you went to meet with the boss, right, and you're in this space and you're going to have that conversation? That's like the no crazy idea threshold right there, right? Certainly the no bad news threshold, or by the time it makes it across that threshold, it's gone from bad to like irretrievable, right? And so I think the trick is to really demonstrate as a leader your willingness to hear people, your encouragement of people, things like the great ideas hunt, trying to find ways over and over to engage folks and give them the confidence to try things. What I have learned in the 2 years I've been here is we've got no shortage of competence. And that's exciting. I mean, that's great. We have such talented, skilled people that I frankly think if there's more ways we could give them a platform to really demonstrate what they could do, that there is no limit to some of the great things that could happen. I think we're trying to do that at an organizational level by demonstrating a willingness to engage in kind of entrepreneurialism. And we started this unit called 18F, which is a group of coders and developers and really smart process people whose job it is to demonstrate for ourselves that we actually have the ability to solve some of our own problems on the technology side, teach ourselves to be better consumers when we buy it from industry, and then spread ideas about agile development, lean development, and some of the innovative tools that software companies and startups are using in Silicon Valley and across the country to really transform and radically change marketplaces. So I think it's something we just have to constantly tell people it's okay and look for opportunities for people to demonstrate, their own innovation and their own initiative. It also means that we have to get the message down to every other manager between me and the person on the front line that we are looking for experiment. We are looking for people to try, and we are looking to be better. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Sage. In an interview with the Washington Post, you were asked what type of culture you were trying to foster at GSA. You responded by saying, "I'd like us to continually come back and say, how are we doing in hitting our goals?" How do you measure the extent of your success, and how do you establish those goals?
Thank you, Sage. That, I think, follows on perfectly with the last question. I think giving people an opportunity to experiment, giving people a chance to innovate, means, though, you have to create a structure by which you determine whether things are going well or going badly. And I think that that's something you can't wait to the end of the calendar year. Sit down and say, okay, how did we do last year? You really want to get more information in real time on a continuous basis so that you can insert kind of you can insert some kind of direction or some ideas or maybe some resources, or maybe just stop and say, okay, you know what, this is going really badly. It's almost like experimentation. It's saying, okay, if I change this, what happens on the other side? What we do for the entire operation of the organization is we sit down with our senior managers and we work out, we kind of negotiate what we think the big goals of the organization will be for the coming year. We think about measures of how we actually see whether we're getting close to attaining the goal. But more importantly, we sit down every 2 weeks and we go through that list. And sometimes it's kind of painful. It's like taking the SAT every 2 weeks. No, it's not that painful. I'm just kidding. I just wanted to get a reaction. Like a little version of it, it's like a quiz, it's a test. It's a test every 2 weeks for all of our leaders and say, okay, here's the goals, here's where we said we would be, how are we doing? And we track red, yellow, green. Are we green? All good? Are we yellow? There's a problem. Are we red? Danger, danger, everyone has to jump in and help out. And I think having that discipline to come back every time, it makes the conversation at the end of the year so much easier because we just literally had the conversation 2 weeks ago. So there's no way if we were like messing everything up, someone could come in and tell me it's all good because we would have seen, just 2 weeks before. But the really important part is not, look, I want everyone to get to all green. I want us to knock everything out of the ballpark. But the way you do that is recognizing how you're making progress and then being willing to renegotiate along the way. So I think that that's really what it takes, is a discipline to keep coming back, being honest with yourself, and then finding a way as a team you can help every member of the team meet their goals and be as good as they can be.
Hi, I'm Zoe.
Hi, Zoe.
I was curious to know if you thought that there was a place for self-reflection in the process of success.
I'm doing it right now. No, I think so. That's a really interesting question. I think that if you are hoping to achieve something of any significance, you have to figure out what your position will be in it. and like the conversation about setting goals and continually measuring them, I can't say I have as disciplined a process for my own personal life, but I think going back and reappraising what you've done and how well you've done it and where you think you've been good and where you think you could be better is incredibly important at being good at whatever you do, and more importantly, defining success for yourself. Because I think it's really important that you not let other people determine what your success is. Because it's your life, it's your happiness, it's your sense of satisfaction, and if you can remember that and focus on that, then you can determine what makes you happy, what makes you successful in your life, and whether you are achieving satisfaction in what you do. And I think that's hard. That's a lifelong journey. I can't say I've figured it out. You are like way kind of ahead of me on that. You have a whole lot of cool stuff you can try, mistakes you can make. Don't make big ones, but go ahead and make some. And I think from that, if you can sit back and reflect on what you learned from it and what you would not want to do or what you would rather have done differently, I think you can be better the next time around. It's all practice. It's all practice, I think you get better by just keep trying stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks, Zoe.
Hi, I'm Noah.
Hi, Noah.
I'm curious where you developed your philosophy of management.
That's a great question, Noah. I think I developed it by just doing it. I think, kind of to Zoe's point, some of the best, most instructive lessons I had were from the places I was least happy. And really asking yourself, well, what is it about working in those places that made you unhappy or wasn't satisfying or didn't feel successful? And I think by understanding what it is that maybe people I worked with or worked for did that I felt was not reaffirming or exciting to work in, and trying with every fiber to avoid doing that or finding the counter activity has been very helpful. I think it's been really something I'm continuing to learn, and I think I can still be a better manager. And I think by making sure you're constantly recognizing that you're not quite there yet, there's an awful lot you can learn from questions like yours and from the people you get to work with. I will say that the most important thing I found as a manager is to do everything in your power to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, who are harder working than you, who are more passionate than you. Find really great people to be around. Find people like I've found here that when you walk into your workspace, you get happier, right? You're not sadder, You're not worrying about the weekend immediately on a Monday morning. What you're interested in hearing is what people did on their weekend when you come in on Monday morning, because you're happy to see the folks and you know that they're smart and they're funny and they're interesting. That's what makes work fun. That's what makes work interesting, and that's what makes that's what gives you the confidence that you can actually get things done.
In an interview with the Chicago Policy Review in 2013, you said, "We can move towards an always-on government where people can get the services they need when they need it and where they need it." Do you find that this vision has caught on with your colleagues, and are you getting support from the executive?
Last part, absolutely. And so I had a meeting with the president about a month ago, and it was a number of us who do kind of the business of government side. And he was just talking about how we need to build a 21st century government, that so many of our processes are rooted in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. My budget director here once said about government technology, and she was joking, that the philosophy often feels like if it ain't broke, don't make it better, right? And so what happens is you miss iteration after iteration of change, and change is happening so fast now. This thing is only, 6, 7 years old? And I joke that I think if I were to remove it from my kids' hands, they might actually die. I haven't tested it because I'm afraid what would happen. And this is only, this is like only within our lifetime. I remember when I got my first one, I felt like I'd mugged an alien or something. I mean, it was so dramatically different. So, the president has told us that, it's unacceptable for us to accept the status quo when the world for the people we work for is changing at the speed of this. And this is just the tip of a technological iceberg that is radically transforming the way we do almost everything in our lives. I joked about video rental stores, but think about music, the way you get music, think about the way you communicate. Think about the way, I rode a bike share bike over here, and I needed to find one because everyone was riding the bike share bikes today. And so I got on the app and I was able to locate one at a dock I didn't even know existed. 7 years ago, we wouldn't have had the bike share and we wouldn't have had an app. And, I'm not sure how I would have gotten here this morning. So I think that at the executive level, it's not like support, it's an imperative. The president's really pushing us to do this. Organizationally, I think whenever I go and talk to anyone, they want to do their work better. And they're frustrated that the work that they do when they come to work doesn't feel like the way they get to do stuff when they're at home. Booking a trip, communicating with people even. And so the real trick is how do we blast through some of the status quo, some of the bureaucracy, some of the process, some of the things that are established that people know work, right? And if we break it, it could have really bad impacts for millions of people. So how do you blast through and give people confidence that we can make a transformation and not break what we're doing now? And I think the way you do that is by making small steps first and building little bits of success. And we've tried to demonstrate ways to do that here at GSA. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Talia.
Hi, Talia.
Out of your $26 billion budget, sorry.
No, the
Little bigger.
$26 is my personal budget. I think that's exactly what I have in my pocket on a good day.
Out of that much larger budget, how much do you actually have control of and how much is simply mandated? And also, how do you determine how to apportion the money that's not mandated?
That's a really cool question. And $26 billion is one number you could use to describe what our budget is. We also do about $65 billion in acquisition services for other agencies, and we manage assets worth more than $500 billion. So it's actually, for this organization, when people ask what's the budget of the organization, it's harder than most because we don't just get a single slug of money from Congress. And we spend a lot of we help other people spend a lot of their money. So at one level, how much control do I have over any of it? You could argue zero, because it's not my money, it's the federal government's money, it's the taxpayers' money. Congress sets limits, the president has expectations. We do work for agencies, and most of our money comes from rent that they pay or procurements that they make, and so it's really their decision at some level where they're going to live and how they're going to spend the money. But in any position like this, you have a certain amount of authority over allocating resources, and the most precious resource we have is time and energy and focus of the organization. And while I think I have ultimately a lot of responsibility there, I think that if you didn't include everyone who actually had to do the work in making that decision, then you are setting yourself up to maybe make a lot of mistakes. And so I think the real trick is to not, being in a position like this, get yourself too super excited about how much power and control you have, because ultimately you really don't have much at all in an organization that's this big, in an organization that's spending taxpayer resources with so much accountability, oversight, and responsibility. The real trick is to figure out how many people you can get involved in the decisions you make, get them to support you. Now, I will tell you, on the negative side, the accountability is almost singular. It really, the buck really does and should stop here in the administrator's office. And I feel deeply responsible for everything that happens in the organization, even if I'm not aware of it or I'm not necessarily in control of it. It's my job to set the managerial framework by which people succeed and get their work done in the most effective and efficient way possible. It's my job then, if something goes wrong, to explain it, to correct it, and to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Daniel.
Hi, Daniel. Cool name.
I agree. Throughout our trip, we have spoken with many people about what skills are necessary to create an effective leader. What characteristics/skills do you think are necessary for a leader to be effective?
So hopefully we've talked a little bit about that already. So I'll go back around on some of that. Again, I think a willingness to learn, tremendous amount of humility. If you want to be really effective, you have to realize that I think humility goes a long way, because that means you'll be willing to listen, you'll be willing to take advice, you'll be willing to believe that maybe you're not precisely 100% right every time. I've found that if you make a mistake and you own that mistake and you say you're sorry and you lay out a course of action on how you're going to correct it and then actually go and correct it, it's amazing how much credit people will give you and how much they're willing to trust and believe you. What's striking to me is how few people are willing to say they're sorry. How few people are willing to admit an error. Now, I think the trick is to catch the errors quickly, address them with a really thoughtful plan, and demonstrate success in responding. And then try to avoid making too many more in a row. That's a little bit of advice. But as I said before, I think finding ways to include as many people as possible, finding the best, smartest, most engaged and interesting people you can work with, I think those are all really the qualities of being a good leader and a good manager. Thanks.
You mentioned a little bit about this before, but you once said it's okay to risk the possibility of blowing up what works. If you don't make continuous improvement or investment, the risk gets big. You eventually get to the point where you have to rebuild the thing from scratch. It seems like you were saying that you have to constantly be reinventing the system, even while it is still successful. How do you know when it is time to start doing that?
So I want to be careful about saying blow up things at work. I don't want to sound like a bureaucratic terrorist or anything, right? But I do think it is important, though, to recognize that it's always the right time to see if there's some way you can do something better. And I think that that's the mistake. We think that in another 5 years, that thing will have reached its, the end of its useful life, and we'll revisit the decision then. Do you think that's the way anyone approaches this stuff? Right? I mean, this is it's only 6, 7 years old. We're up to the iPhone 5S, 2 anyway. And how many different versions of the software? We've had the versions of the software they've told us about that they've changed, but tomorrow you'll get another update. And I think we have to recognize that that's what smart organizations do. They're constantly assessing and updating their processes and their systems. In the 1980s and 1990s, the Japanese really mastered the process or the skill of manufacturing at the highest possible quality and the lowest possible cost. They took some work from a great process studier, this guy Alfred Deming, and they combined it with a real rigorous mathematical analysis to come up with something called Lean Six Sigma, in which they looked at their manufacturing processes and they worked with the people who were actually building the cars and asked them how we could do it better. They took the engineers and the marketing and the manufacturing people and they put them together and said, what is it, the things that people want? How do we build that into the car? What's hard to fix? How do we make sure that things that keep breaking don't keep breaking? And constantly looking at the production line. At the end of every shift, they would have the people working on the cars get together in a meeting and talk about how they could do the process better, or whether that person was taking a little extra time, or did they need extra help, or did they have any ideas about how to change the tools. The reason why we have a renaissance in American manufacturing right now is because we've adopted these principles of continuous improvement, collaboration, and assessment of data. And I think that that's what we need to do in all our business processes, is continually evaluate them and ask ourselves, can they be better? And challenge and frankly invite everyone in the organization to suggest ways to make them better. Now, sometimes that will mean a big investment in pulling out some computer and replacing it with a different kind of computer. But what I'm really getting at is more that kind of continuous, endless process of asking yourself, is there a better way to do this? Is there some other way? Do we need to do that step? If I move closer to that person, would we be able to communicate more? And I think that's, it's not quite as dramatic as that quote sounds. It's actually lots of little explosions, more like firecrackers, going off endlessly within the organization, and kind of waking people up and asking, can we be better and smarter? Thanks. Hey.
My name is Luciano.
Hi, Luciano.
Yes. Often those who hold demanding jobs make personal sacrifices. Do you find it challenging to balance your work as head of the GSA and your family life?
Yes. So this morning in the dramatic plumbing incident, great example. I knew I had you coming, and I wanted to be here for you, but I also knew I had a problem at the house. So my wife is a pediatric nurse practitioner. She sees sick kids, so her schedule is really important to protect. I would be lying if I would say it's not hard, and you're not constantly balancing, and you might get it right sometimes and mess it up other times. But just like I said, it's important managerially to be in a continuous dialogue with the people you work with. I think personally, it's important to be in a continuous dialogue with the people who are the most important in your life, and that's your family. So I can tell you that one of the things that I think has helped me a lot is I've never worked more than 3 miles from my house. We've lived in the same house now for 20 years, which doesn't sound very creative, but the neighborhood around us has changed so much that it almost feels like we've moved. And the fact that I could bike or run or walk to work gives me some self-reflection time, gives me some exercise, but actually makes it really easy for me to get to and from home. So I've stolen an hour or 2 out of the commuting schedule by being so close to where I live. And I've always made it a principle to do what I could to get home to read to my kids. And I've been reading to both my girls. My oldest one cut me off when she hit 9th grade. My younger one's hitting 9th grade next year, and I've asked her already, am I getting cut off? She's like, well, I might still let you read to me every now and then. But just having some ritual is really important, so that there's an engagement, and there's a time, and there's a period that you can share. I love helping my wife with the work in the garden, although I've been in charge now of the compost pile, which is, I don't know how I get that job. It's like, I only get the hard jobs apparently. So, but anyway, that's another great ritual that we have, and some time that we share.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name's Jenny.
Hi, Jenny.
Have you had any significant mentors in your career, and if so, what are some of the important things that they have taught you?
Yes, I've had lots of mentors, both official and unofficial. Some who have known themselves to be mentors, and others I just worshipped from afar, if you will. People that I really thought, wow, they're really smart and cool and interesting, and I will do whatever I can to learn more from them. When I was at OMB, when I first started at OMB, the director at the time was a guy by the name of Richard Darman, and he was just a really thoughtful, smart, brilliant manager of government processes. He started this thing called a lunch talk that employees could go to, and I kept signing up for it. And after the 3rd time I went, one of the one of the boss folks came to me and was like, why do you keep signing up for the director's lunch? You know, there's like this kind of creepy thing going on there. It's like, why are you? And I said, look, I'm a junior chipmunk, like budget preparation specialist. If I can go and spend an hour with the director of OMB, why wouldn't I? And I said, okay, well, you should stop signing up and let other people go. But I think they were wrong. I think I was right, and I think that you should find ways that you can look for opportunities to listen to or observe people you respect and admire, because that's how you learn. Now, in other instances, I've had opportunities to work with people who, when I asked, look, could I just run a problem by you, or could I have a cup of coffee? You'd be surprised how many people are willing to say yes. People are flattered to think that they have some advice that they can impart. The best people, the people you probably want to most emulate, are the ones who are most likely to say yes. The ones who you can't get past their guard are probably the ones to observe from afar and learn from in a different way. And I think that that's the trick. I think you should try to find people. I think you have mentors probably in this room. Don't think a mentor is simply someone who's already gone off and done what you wanted to do, or done something you think is big. A mentor is anyone who can help listen to your problems and maybe give you advice, good, bad, or indifferent. Generally, the best part of that dialogue is just you having to frame your idea or your problem and saying it out loud. And it's amazing if you actually do that in the presence of someone else who you like and respect and you feel safe with. It's amazing how some of these problems sound less big when you actually utter them, or how the answer actually becomes a little bit more obvious when you've said the problem and someone's asked you some of the basic questions. And I hate to say it, sometimes it's hard for you to do it with a parent or a teacher who you have kind of some stake in maintaining a reputation or a relationship with. So I would look for people you admire in terms of friends, pastors, people you work with, or have maybe teachers you had before. I think that you have a lot of resources around you, and people are sometimes a little less aware of how many there are out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Dan, part of what I like to do when we're engaged in this kind of process is to have the students feedback a little bit about what they heard that struck them from the conversation, to kind of see how things landed. And by the way, the listening people into their own answers, I think is a brilliant strategy for a mentor. That when it's amazing when somebody actually really listens to you with curiosity, how that changes things.
So one of the people who most directly exemplifies that approach to mentorship is the now Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, John Koskinen, who I worked with when I was a budget examiner at OMB and just starting out. I worked for when I was the Director of Transportation in the city, and he had come in as the city administrator. And he, when I later took the job as city administrator, was very instructive in teaching me how to do the job. And even to this day, is someone I turn to often when I have an issue or a problem or a decision. And when I've asked him, what makes him do it or what motivates him to do it, he said, look, I realize that the benefit of this conversation is actually you having to tell me what the issue is, and me asking you a question or two, but for the most part you're doing all the work. I'm just sitting here eating lunch, and that was going to happen anyway. So
it's good. All right, so let's hear what struck you so far. Oh goodness. Okay, Jay, we'll give you the opener here.
I was really impressed with, and I just love the way that you're so good at translating your thoughts into really clear, understandable statements. And then that's a skill that I, wish I had more, but it's...
You're doing all right, actually, yeah. You should have seen me at your age, so...
well, we'll see how I turn out. But yeah, that I was very impressed with the clarity with which you convey ideas, and I think that shows a big part of why it's so great that we have someone like you doing the work that you're doing.
It's very nice. Thank you very much.
Yeah, go ahead, Noah.
When you were answering Preeti's question about, changing everything, you said that like it's always the right time to see if you can make things better. Really struck me because, I think we get kind of lulled into the sense of repetition.
So I think that's, you've heard the expression that people are creatures of habit, and I think we all are, and we like kind of having a routine and a habit and habits, but I think where we can actually continually get better is when we give ourselves permission to break those routines, try new things, and see if we can change our habits a little bit. It's hard. It's really hard, but you have to constantly empower yourself. And as a manager and a leader, I think that's the job. I mean, people are saying, at one town hall, someone said to me, "It's like, okay, when do we go back to normal? When does all the change stop?" And I said, "Look, I hate to break it to you, but this is the new normal, right? We're going to constantly be changing. We have to." And I think it's if we can, build that into our kind of personal philosophy, even the way we lead our lives, we will then be continually learning people, and we'll be continually curious and continually excited about the next day.
You said that humility goes a long way, and it just struck me because looking through my notes, like everything you said is about how like you admire someone for this trait, or like how you're not like you wanted to be with like everyone else who would be lower than you, just like everything you've said so far is humble, and it just kind of validates like all the other things that you've said. So
that's nice. So they're saying like, I'm the humblest guy I know, doesn't, so that's the trick, is like, how do you be humble in your humility too? Because it can kind of sound like a little self-aggrandizing. And so I think that's something, I learned that, I was reading a business article recently, and it said that the most successful businesses are led by people who use the word we more than I. So whenever they're talking about their enterprise, they talk about, we did this, we did that. And I'm going to say, I think that that's one of the hardest things for an individual to do, is to try to take themselves out of, the credit lens, if you will, and make it about we and us rather than me and I. And so that's something, you just have to work at. It's actually hard. You actually have to work at it. And I have to say, it's probably harder to some extent for all of you because of the social media driven kind of mass personal fame thing, right? That like the Facebook is really like the me book. And so I think that's something you can practice and try. When you're talking about, when you're updating your timeline, can you talk about we rather than I? Can you do ussies rather than selfies? Just made that up. I may want to go, But yeah, I mean, are there ways that you can try to constantly work on it? And I'll have to say I'm constantly doing it too. And being in a space that isn't like kind of self-referential like this, working in a space in which you're around other people all the time, kind of reminds you to be humble and thoughtful about how you approach other people and how you approach your work. Thanks.
Yeah, so just sort of, finding what makes you happy and then living your life on that route instead of sort of, just going with what someone else might think the formula for success is, because there really isn't one. And it's always nice when we talk to people, like you, who have accomplished so much and are working, at a place like this, for you to sort of talk about these things that, we talk about back at in our little classroom. It validates it, so that was really nice.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think that at some level, this job is a kind of a real traditional, there's a real traditional sense of success in having the opportunity to do a job like this. But how I got here was a very kind of vague and somewhat random, but I would say in reflection, interesting and exciting path. And I think it's less the individual position that you do or the job that you have, but more about that journey you get to take along the way. I like back roads rather than interstates in general. And my career has been one heck of an interesting back road, that's for sure. But you know, they all eventually get at some level to the place you want to go if you have a real good sense of how you measure, you know, getting there, how you measure your destination. So I appreciate that you picked that out, and I appreciate that it's clear that you've thought a lot about that, and I'd encourage all of you to be your own kind of GPS system and set your own destination and evaluate whether it's the right one or not. Sometimes you think the thing you really, really, really want to do, you know, that is worth making every sacrifice along the way to. Be careful about stacking up too many of those sacrifices, because you might get to that thing and realize it wasn't quite as great as you thought it was going to be. Few things seldom are. And so I think it's really important to make sure you enjoy what you're doing, you get value out of what you're doing every day you're doing it. John Koskinen once said to me, never do a job for the next job, because while you're waiting for that next job, you have to do that job. And if you're really not in it, if you really don't feel it, if you don't believe in it, you won't be as good at it. And that will hamper your ability to get that next job. So think about, you know, the great gift you have in time, and think about ways you maximize, you know, the benefit of it.
Lex?
I was really struck by when you said you can't anonymize your suggestions and you can't anonymize your response. Last week we talked to Susan Markham, and she said to us that if you believe in something, you can't sit back and expect others to fight for it. And that the parallel I connected between that was just, if you truly believe in something or you have an idea, you do have to speak up if you want to make that change. So it was just affirming that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think anonymity and privacy are incredibly important, and they have their place. But I think if you're going to be part of a community and you really want to change that community, and if you really want to send a signal that this community is going to reward all input, it has to be, you have to be willing to stand up, assign your name to it, and take a position. Now, we have to have an organization and create a culture that doesn't penalize people for taking a controversial position. I mean, that was what we're inviting people to do. We had one guy whose great idea was that everyone should bring their own office supplies. Now, that was a deeply unpopular idea. Really unpopular. Get the most comments, you know, and people, even without anonymity, were happy to respond. That's a terrible idea. But after the initial shock, people started saying, well, we could do a better job at managing our office supplies, and we could buy cheaper office supplies or use different ways of getting the office supplies. And what we found actually through that dialogue was that we weren't even using the best contract that we had created for the entire federal government that collectivized all our office supply buying and reduced price. We weren't even using it, our own contract. And so that idea, which was really controversial, by everyone engaging in a debate and dialogue, had turned into a really great idea that saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars and got a better outcome, and made us a little more legitimate when we went and talked to other people about using that office supply contract. So I think you're right. I think you do have to be willing to raise your hand and say, okay, maybe you can even preface it, say, this might sound like a crazy idea, but how about? And then the trick is, can you create an environment and can you work with people or have a friend group in which that's okay? It's okay to be outspoken, it's okay to be controversial, and it's fun, you know, that you can have a dialogue and a debate and a discussion.
Okay, so let's take a couple more. Whoa. Who really has something to say? Toby.
All right. I liked how you said no single person gets anything done in an organization this big, because it really shows that if you do want to change in the world or just in an organization, you really have to find others who want to do it also, and it shows the value of teamwork, and that you really can't do anything by yourself, but with others, anything is really possible.
So let me refine that a little more and say that there are lots of things you can do by yourself, and there's lots of times when you have to be willing to stand up and maybe say something that isn't being said. Maybe there's an idea that you come up with that's like your cool idea. But really to implement anything, to actually see it through in a way that it actually becomes a bigger part of the process or has an impact, as we will have in our work on millions of people, that requires other people to come along. And so just having a brilliant idea in a way isn't good enough. You have to figure out a way to communicate it. You have to figure out a way to build advocacy for it. You have to understand the process and the system to get it done. And there might be a person who knows how to do all that themselves, but I haven't met them yet. And so I think the real key is, how do you build relationships, and how do you build support, and how do you build networks that you can then rely on and use and be used by to get different results and outcomes.
Well, throughout this whole trip, we've been talking about leadership and specifically hierarchy versus collaboration, like as theories. But I was really struck by how this organization was like opened up and the walls were torn down to like really show collaboration in a physical form, and how that's worked really well. And it just struck me, like you can't just talk about it in like theory and like, oh, we're collaborating through walls.
We're collaborating over there, yeah, at between 9 and 10:30. No, you're right. And I don't know, we think it's worked really well, but we're not sure how to gauge and measure that. And so we're figuring that out too. And I don't know if it works for everyone, so I wouldn't want to force it down anyone's throat. Change imposed is change opposed. And so we're still trying to figure it through, but that's part of the collaborative process, is to listen to people's concerns and complaints. Sometimes though, you do have to take like a kind of a strong leadership position and say, no, we're going to go, right? Because you can't have analysis paralysis. You can spend too much time rethinking. And you can, in the fear of making a mistake or hurting someone's feelings or changing the way they always did stuff, you may prevent yourself from pushing as hard as you can. And so I think the trick is to recognize the concerns people raise and then say, okay, I'm going to take ownership ultimately as the leader and manager and say, this is where we're going. Make sure people feel like they were heard, even if they weren't necessarily listened to, if you know what I mean.
It really struck me when you said some of the most instructive lessons I had were from the places I was least happy. And earlier this year, we read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, and a lot of what he talks about is finding meaning in every situation, and like even no matter how bad it is. And I just think that's a really interesting sentiment of making the best of every situation, and you have to find meaning or else you'll never learn from anything.
All I can say is I think I want to take this class. Can I,
Absolutely.
when is it next offered?
Next year you can come in with
All right,
11th graders.
That would be great. That would be great. And then someone could teach me how to, use some of the features of this I haven't figured out yet.
So Roger, let's give you one more voice and then we'll go to the closer. Since he knew about the Teapot Dome scandal.
Ah, all right. Yeah, I don't know why we keep telling people about that, actually. It seems like kind of bad mojo, but anyway.
At the very beginning, or not the very beginning, but earlier in the interview, you said you were talking about going where you needed or where you were needed and taking the jobs that other people don't want to do. And I think that takes a certain amount of humility and a certain sense of responsibility and a sense of service. And that's something that I really aspire to find in myself. And I see that in you, in the way that you talk about your leadership and the way that you collaborate with other people, and I want to thank you for that.
Well, and I think it's in all of us, and I think we all, at some level, share some sense of duty and responsibility. And you obviously have, great folks in this class and fantastic teachers, and I'm sure wonderful parents who, really want you to be, the best possible person. And they want you to be happy, and they want you to be successful in the way you gauge success. And I'll just tell you that finding a way to do that through service to your community, through community service, through volunteerism, through participation in nonprofits, through involving yourself in arts, through running for office, participating in the political process, or having an opportunity to work in government service are all ways to scratch that itch. And I think what you'll find is it's one of those itches that just gets itchier and you feel like you just want to keep scratching it, but it's not annoying, it's actually kind of fun. You know, you actually, you get all kinds of psychic capital even if you don't get stock options. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Brianna. On behalf of this very large group here today, I would like to thank you for coming and taking the time to speak with us today. Traditionally, at the end of our interviews, we like to ask the interviewee for any advice they would like to share with us. I know you've already given us loads of great advice, so before we part our separate ways, I was wondering if you would like to share anything else with us.
So I have an 11th grader at home, an 11th grader and an 8th grader. So I know that it seems really complicated and really scary. And you know, you're going into the college process and that's incredibly competitive. And I know that you feel like your life, your whole life is being determined by this couple years. And I'll just tell you, and I tell Cassie, that it seems really big right now. And for you, it is really big. It's everything for you right now. But you have to recognize that this is a huge world with 7 billion people spread out over, you know, vast continents, which you should be really excited about the opportunity to go and explore and go meet folks, and that your whole life is gonna be filled with all these crazy crossroads, all these decisions you'll make or are made for you. And I think if you're thoughtful and smart about who you are, who you want to be, you're constantly learning, you're constantly asking questions, you're trying to meet different people and expand your network and your friend groups. If you don't limit yourself, you'll find that there's no limit to where you go. So it may seem like really scary and really challenging, but I'll just tell you, as someone who's a little further down the road than you, you're at a really exciting, important and interesting time. And the one extra bit of advice I'd give you, which I gave to my niece who just graduated from my college, she said, you know, Uncle Danny, she calls me that, I'd rather you didn't, what advice would you give me that you wish someone had given you before? And I said, I wish I had asked more, even if I thought the answer might be no. Because I think it was Wayne Gretzky said that 100% of shots not taken are not goals, right? So why not take as many shots on goal as you can? Why not ask? Why not try? Why not, you know, go where someone else doesn't go and run the risk of failure? Because if you don't try, you definitely have failed at that. And I think that that's the great thing about being young, about being smart, about having it all in front of you, is that you have lots of opportunity. And I just hope I keep reminding myself that I have lots of opportunity to fail too, and not be so afraid of making a mistake or hearing no or failing at something that I don't try. So you guys don't seem to have any reservation or problem with that. I'm expecting great things, and I think I called it right. I'm sure I'll be working for one of you at some point. So thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to talk to you. And I have to say that I think I took more out of this opportunity than maybe you did. This was really great. I appreciate your questions, really thoughtful. And clearly you've got a great teacher, and it's a fantastic program.
Thank you, Dan.
So thanks.
Thank you.